Cleanup operations to suppress the Taliban, Afghan military has killed 244 Taliban terrorists in the last 24 hours. 141 other terrorists have been wounded in the operations. During the operations in Lagman, Paktika, Kandahar, Zabul, Badghis, Farah, Helmand and Kapisa provinces, forces have discovered and defused 9 IEDs. 15 Taliban terrorists were killed in outskirts of Kunduz provincial center as a result of an overnight airstrike. The Taliban's insurgency is gaining momentum, and in the last 2 months, at least 120 districts have fallen to the Taliban, mostly in northern and northeastern Afghanistan. The terrorists made massive overnight strides through northern Afghanistan, leading to several hundred of Afghan forces fleeing across the border into Tajikistan. As Taliban fighters advanced towards the border, more than 300 Afghan military personnel crossed from Afghanistan's Badakhshan province. Faizabad is feared to be the first provincial capital to be taken over by the Taliban. This has led to many senior local officials from the city escaping to Kabul. There have been cases of Afghan army, police, and intelligence troops surrendering their military outposts. Officials blame the recent gains on the poor morale of troops who are mostly outnumbered and left without resupplies.
امروز ساعات قبل تعداد زیادی از قطعات ویژه و کماندو به بدخشان رسیده و ما عنقریب عملیات‌های تصفیه‌ای و بازپسگیری محلات از دست رفته را آغاز خود کردیم.
وضعیت خرابی خاطر باندې وسایط و ټول شیان د پولیسو د سرحدي لوا سره کمبوتات ډیر دي او دغه سره اردو کمانډویان شاته ولاړ دي موږ په خط کې پراته یو.
The Taliban has captured a key district in Kandahar province, Panjwai, after fierce fighting with Afghan government forces. After the takeover, the secretary of Kandahar's governor was killed when a bomb attached to his car blew up. The district police headquarters and governor's office building are already captured. The fall of Panjwai is significant for the Taliban, as the province of Kandahar is the birthplace of the Taliban. The Taliban's leader, Hibatullah Akhundzada, hails from Panjwai. The confiscation of Panjwai has sent scores of families fleeing their homes. The extremist group aims to impose a harsh version of Islamic Sharia law, which it calls genuine Islamic system. This as US President Joe Biden has told Ashraf Ghani that the Afghans must decide their own future. Ahmad Shuja Jamal, head of international relations and regional cooperation at the ONSCS, is joining us live from Kabul. Good to see you. There are claims and counterclaims by both Taliban and the Afghan forces. How is the situation panning out in the northern region?
Thank you very much for having me. It's the ONSC, the Office of the National Security Council, from which I'm speaking to you at the moment. The situation is that in the last few weeks, the Afghan government has actually decided, in order for us to use our resources optimally on the battlefield, we have decided to vacate certain checkpoints and certain locations in the north so that the vulnerable troops vulnerable from Taliban attacks could actually come to safer ground. And the resources, air resources that we used to supply these vulnerable checkpoints could be conserved so we could actually hit the Taliban with the additional resources, the freed up resources of our Air Force. And so some of the falling checkpoints, so-called, are really because of a readjustment of the force posture. Some of it is really because the Taliban are pushing a policy of complete military takeover, which is misguided, but it's also a use of terrorism at an escalated level that belies their attempt and their and their pretense of making peace. So some of it, like I said, is the reposturing of our troops and resources, and that'll take a while for the battlefield situation to shake out and equilibrium to be restored. But some of it is because the Taliban are pursuing a strategy of military takeover in contravention to their stated position for peace.
Right. Ahmed, can you tell us to what extent has Taliban penetrated into Afghan regions in terms of presence and even numbers?
The Taliban do not have a permanent governing fixed presence in much of the territory that they claim that they own, particularly in the districts that they claim to have taken over in recent weeks, primarily because their job it's a thin line that is coming and taking over. They're not able to establish presence because we are assaulting them back to drive them back, and many districts have been taken back in this way. When a district falls to the Taliban, that's news, but when we retake a district, that's less of a news, primarily because it is expected of the government to maintain presence in these areas. And so to answer your question, the Taliban do not have a significant presence in these territories, primarily because they are vulnerable to being driven out, and they're not able to establish any kind of meaningful presence in these regions.
Kandahar's key district was taken over by Taliban yesterday. How symbolically important is this move by Taliban?
Look, the fact that districts and territory changes hands is less significant compared to when you look at what the Taliban do in the areas where they take control. Before they take control, the Taliban in some cases actually starve those districts of food supplies, of medical supplies, and therefore they put pressure on the civilians in that region by choking off these supplies, by creating artificial escalation of prices. But also, once a particular district falls, however temporarily, for 24 hours, 3 days, 4 days, 3 hours before it's being retaken, the Taliban actually plant IEDs in the areas where they take control. Panjwai is one of the infamous examples where they took control of it a few months ago. They planted IEDs in people's orchards, in the pomegranate fields, in the wheat fields. They planted IEDs in the roadways and the village paths. They planted IEDs in the roads leading in and out of the district, and they planted IEDs. These are improvised explosive devices. These are mines, homemade mines, in people's homes. And so the civilians from Panjwai who were hoping to actually leave the district as the violence escalated were blown up because the roads are bombed. The civilians who were coming home after the district was retaken were being bombed because their homes were now booby-trapped. The civilians who were hoping to tend to their crops, pomegranate yields, anar, after the district was freed, were also being blown up because the Taliban had bombed everywhere. And so this scorched earth policy that the Taliban pursue in areas of their control is really not endearing the group, even among people who may otherwise have had Taliban sympathies, because of this indiscriminate attack on the well-being of civilians in their homes, the privacy and security of their homes being compromised, and the privacy and security of their private property, their orchards and their fields. That is what is happening in Panjwai. It happened a few months ago, but we took Panjwai back and cleaned all of those areas, but we're having to now push them back in that way as well. And when you plant so many IEDs in these areas, it becomes harder to push them out quickly because you have to defuse each IED, and that takes a long time.
In fact, my last question to you, Ahmed, is about the civilians. What is the situation like on ground? How are the people reacting to the emerging situation?
You will never hear that people are leaving government-controlled areas to go and settle in Taliban-controlled areas. That is never, it's inconceivable, primarily because the Taliban have nothing to offer but a rule of draconian control. But now, wherever the Taliban go, the people actually leave. People are voting with their feet because they do not want anything with the Taliban, primarily because of the violence that they bring indiscriminately, but also because of the draconian rules that they put in place. They don't want women to be out of their homes unless there is a male chaperone. They don't want women to have positions of public authority. And in the areas in the north where they've taken control, that's exactly what they've done. They've also taken people out of their homes homes in their areas of their control, people who have any kind of affiliation with the Afghan government, with the media, with civil society, or with our international partners, including development NGOs. And so they've taken them, they've tortured them, they've actually intimidated and pushed them and used violence in some cases in these areas where they've taken control.
امروز ساعات قبل تعداد زیادی از قطعات ویژه و کماندو به بدخشان رسیده و ما عنقریب عملیات‌های تصفیه‌ای و بازپسگیری محلات از دست رفته را آغاز خواهد کردیم.
وضعیت خرابی خاطر روان دي وسایط و ټول شیان د پولیسو د سرحدي لوا سره کمبوتات ډیر دي او دغه سره اردو کمانډویان شاته ولاړ دي موږ په خط کې پراته یو.
سوله د کومه د خو ترایې د پراوال بزګ دا خو د یو تیار راوال بزګ دا کده ګرد کندهار بس دا تیارې دي چشته ساتي ولې موږ په وجنی وروره فران غریبان خلک د کښنی بچان توسته دا اوس ځې نشانې کړي چې زه وشتلې وای لازم د بچانو سرپرستی چا کول سودان نه شو
Ahmed, live from Kabul, thank you very much for talking to WION.